Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to my Twitch channel. My name is Kris, this is Wizard Way, and we're going to be reading more of the Silmarillion today. Silmarillion Saturday is back. Missed last week in order to properly grieve the death of my partner, just past the 2-year anniversary, or deathiversary, of her passing. So I took a bit of a break. It was good that I took a bit of a break, and now we're back. So more Silmarillion today. I do have this beautiful copy of the Quinta Silmarillion, which I'll be reading from. I also have an overhead cam, so if you guys want to see illustrations as we go along, I will be able to show them to you. Another reason to join over on Twitch, everybody on TikTok. Thank you! But yeah, so we will continue with the Silmarillion today. We are on chapter, chapter 10. So we will likely be doing chapters 10 through 12 if I can manage to get through them quickly. As always, I do have voice modifications, and forgive me if there are awkward pauses when I try and use those, because I have to toggle them on and off. I try, though. I try. Thank you, Fennel Cakes. Appreciate that. Welcome over on Twitch. Alright. So, last time, the last chapter that we covered was the flight of the Noldors. So just to catch everybody up, in case you missed the last couple streams, the Noldor finally rebelled. We learned all about Feanor and his attitude. He has an ample amount of fire in his spirit, thus his name meaning fire spirit. Fear is the word for spirit, and Naur is fire. So Feanaro is the Quenya version of Feanor. So, oh, looks like a cat's coming. Great. Hi. Hi, pretty boy. He's right behind my mic. Of course he is. You're so pretty. I'm gonna move my mic just so you can see him. Oh, look at that pretty kitty. Hi, Gray. You're majestic, you know that? My cat's majestic as fuck. I love my cat. I'm trying to move the mic to accommodate. I love my kitties. Gray's the only one in the room today. Oh, he's loafing. I love it. Zoe, welcome. Hey, Birdman, what is up? And feline. Welcome, everybody. But yes, so Feanor has quite the attitude, and he finally got a stick in his butt by the Valar, the other elves, especially his half-brother Fingolfin. Everything upsets Feanor. And so he refused to give up the Silmarils to the Valar, because we had an attack by Melkor, the main baddie, who's Sauron's boss. Melkor attacked with Ungoliant. Ungoliant is a giant spider lady, and she drank the light out of the two trees and killed them. So Melkor speared them, she drank from them, the trees died. The only way to revive the two trees of Valinor was to take the light from the Silmarils back. And so Yavanna was like, dude, all we have to do, literally all we have to do, is break the Silmarils, and we can bring the two trees back. To which Aule was like, whoa, 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 like, you don't realize how much you are asking of Feanor, because this is Feanor's greatest work. It's his life's work to make these stones. He's like, so, you know, don't take this lightly. It's not just let's take the Silmarils and break them. Like, that means a lot to Feanor. Let him speak. Feanor decided, nah, not worth it. These are my life's work. I'll never make their like again. I treasure them. They're part of me. You can't take them and break them. No. So the two trees died. Feanor got a bee in his bonnet. Feanor's father, Finwë, was attacked and killed by Melkor. He was the first elf to die. in Valinor. First elf to die in Valinor. That's worth saying. Hi, Gray. And here he is. Gray, you can't stay here. What are you doing? Come on, Gray. Move it. Cat butt. So, Finwë got killed. Feanor was pretty upset over it. And he decided, nah, we're done. We're done. I'm done. The Valar are keeping us here because they want Middle-earth to be the realm of men when they eventually show up. Why are we being kept from lands that we could rule? I want power that's my own. And the Valar are just using me. They want the Silmarils. Not cool. So Feanor rallies all of the Noldor, basically, and he marches down to the havens at Alcolonde, which is a seaside town where the Teleri live. Excuse you, Gray. He's gonna be all up in my face now. I swear, I start talking through a mic and he's like, meow? But Feanor brings all of the Noldor down to Alcolonde and says, hey, you guys have boats, and we could really use those boats to get back to Middle-earth. We're cool, right? We're besties, like, give us your boats. But much like the Silmarils were Feanor's life's work, and he wasn't willing to give them away, the Teleri were like, these ships are our lives. Like, we made them with our blood, sweat, and tears. You can't just have them. The answer is no, Feanor. And Feanor did not take kindly to this. Not only did it tick him off that they wouldn't help him, but he also felt a bit of a panic, because he thought, if I wait too long, the Noldor are going to turn back, and they're going to second guess this, and they're going to leave me in order to stay in Valinor. They are going to betray me if I don't act now. I have to strike while the iron is hot. Gray? I know. You're such a whiny boy today. He's like, rude. But he knew that he needed to strike while the iron was hot, or else, all of his impassioned words were going to wear off. The Feanor effect was going to wear off. And so, instead of trying to convince the Teleri, because Feanor had made weapons, and had basically dispersed weapons amongst the Noldor, they took them by force, and that was the first kinslaying. So when we left off, the kinslaying had happened, Feanor had fled north with all of the Noldor, and he realized that the ships that he had taken by force from the Teleri weren't enough to ferry all of the elves, all of the Noldor, from Ahriman, which is the upper portion of the continent that has Valinor in it. He couldn't ferry everyone from Ahriman back to Middle-earth. There just wasn't enough space in the ships, because not enough of them survived the ships. And realizing this, he was like, well, I don't want to do it in multiple trips. That's not going to happen. And so in secret, he took all of his followers and his sons, his 7 sons, and all of them took the ships and crossed over into Middle-earth, unbeknownst to the other elves. And so they get over to Middle-earth, and Maedhros, Feanor's eldest son, was like, hey, so we're sending the boats back, right? We're sending those back. And, like, who are you gonna bring over? Like, my best friend Fingon? My cousin Fingon. Like, you gotta bring him over first, because he's loyal and I love him. I'm reading a bit into that. But there was a great friendship between Maedhros and Fingon. Fingon is the eldest son of Fingolfin. So while there was no love lost between Feanor and Fingolfin, their 2 eldest sons really, really liked each other. Close friends, very close. So he's like, hey, we're sending the boats back, right? We're gonna get Fingon, right? Right, Dad? Right? And Feanor was like, ha, wrong and wrong, my son. Burn the boats. Burn the ships. Let them burn. And so, with his own hand, he sets fire to the boats, and all of his followers do the same, and then you have the burning of the ships at Losgар, which is this beautiful illustration here. The boats are on fire. It was a bad time, okay? Not the best of times. So the other Noldor, seeing this, were quite upset. And they were like, dude, Valinor, what the fuck? Like, why? Why would you do this? But regardless, they were like, well, we can't turn back and go back to Valinor. We're exiled at this point. We can't just turn around and go back. So they went over the Helcaraxe, which is the grinding ice, and that is a very inhospitable, icy glacier landscape with big fissures and people falling into the chasms of ice and people drowning and freezing to death and not fun. So, end of summary. Basically, the other Noldor go through the Helcaraxe and they do come into Middle-earth. They do follow, but Feanor's been there for a bit at that point. I think in other books, Tolkien says that it took them like several months, close to a year, about a year-ish. It took them a bit of time to get from one continent to the other. It was not a good time, and there were heavy casualties. So, that is where we left off. The Noldor had all gotten back into Middle-earth. So, Chapter 10 is of the Sindar, the Sindar being the elves who never left Middle-earth. They are the Grey Elves. So we'll be talking about them. Take a quick look through here. Yeah, we'll be talking a lot about Thingol, whom we've already met. Thingol is Elwë, one of the head elves, but he is the king of the Sindar. He's the one who married Melian the Maya, and his kid is Luthien Tmuviel. We haven't gone into Luthien much. We will get to her story in a few more weeks. Is there an estimate of how many Noldor in both companies made the actual crossing? I haven't seen an exact number, but certainly thousands, likely tens of thousands. It was quite a few. There were many. But the ships, I would say it took maybe a third of the force. So I'm not positive. I'm not positive how many exactly, but I think it would be tens of thousands total. Both the Feanorians and the other Noldor that came over with Fingolfin. So, I can't give you an exact number, I apologize. Sulad, welcome everybody. Love the info on the Silmarillion, but reading it felt like studying a textbook. It's basically a history text. Tolkien wrote a history book of this world. Absolutely. But that's why I'm reading it for you. I can thoroughly explain things. A lot of times I know the etymology behind all the names, so I can help you guys get a bit more depth and explain things so that you can keep all the characters straight, because that's half the struggle. Every character has like 3 names in this book. It doesn't help. Good job, Tolkien. But let's get started. Been chatting for about 15 minutes now, so let's get going. All right. Chapter 10 of the Sindar. Now, as has been told, the power of Elwë and Melian increased in Middle-earth, and all the elves of Beleriand, from the mariners of Círdan to the wandering hunters of the Blue Mountains beyond the river Gelion, owned Elwë as their lord. Elu Thingol he was called, King Greymantle, in the tongue of his people. They are called the Sindar, the Grey Elves of Starlit Beleriand. And although they were Moraquendi, under the lordship of Thingol and the teaching of Melian, they became the fairest and the most wise and skillful of all the elves of Middle-earth. And at the end of the First Age, of the chaining of Melkor, when all the earth had peace and the glory of Valinor was at its noon, there came into the world Luthien, the only child of Thingol and Melian. Though Middle-earth lay for the most part in the sleep of Yavanna, In Valerian, under the power of Melian, there was life and joy, and the bright stars shone as silver fires. And there was, in the forest of Neldoreth, Luthien was born. And there in the forest of Neldoreth, Luthien was born. And the white flowers of Nefredil came forth to greet her as stars from the earth. There is a quick pause here, so I will pause to mention that there is a term in here called Morroquendi that might be a little confusing. Morroquendi means elves of the dark. The Quendi is a Quenya term for the elves, and Morroquendi are the dark elves, the elves of Twilight. This doesn't mean that they are drows, as you would think from like D&D, but they are the elves that never beheld the light of the two trees in Valinor. The only elf in Middle-earth at this point who has seen the two trees with his own eyes is Eleuthingol, or Elwë. Again, he has multiple names, I apologize. But Thingol has seen the two trees, and Melian is a Maya, so she also has seen the two trees, and she's a heavenly being. So between the two of them, they rule over the entirety of Valerian, because they have a lot of power, and they basically glow with an inner light. So the rest of the Sindar are Morroquendi. The only exception is Elwë, or Eleuthingol. He is what would be called a Calaquendi, or an elf of the light. So just wanted to explain that term in case anyone got a little confused, because I would understand. And so they're just mentioning that Luthien is born during the first age of the chaining of Melkor, which at the end of the last chapter, we were long past that. Melkor had been unchained for quite a while, so Luthien is pretty old. Thousands upon thousands of years old. She's pretty old. What does my shirt say? My shirt says Team Lindon. T-I-M, Team. L-I-N-D-O-N. So, Team Lindon. It's part of my series of shirts for the Amazon TV show. I jumped the gun, but hopefully when the show comes out, there will be inclusion of the various realms in Valerian, in Middle-earth during the Second Age. Lindon is one of those realms. So I have Team Eregion, Team Lindon, Team Greenwood, or Eringalan, which is where Thranduil and Legolas live. Team Khazad-dûm, for any dwarf fans, and Team Numenor, for any fans of the Numenorians. So there are different teams. These shirts are all on my Teespring shop. And yes, as soon as my website is up, which give me literally a week, I plan on having my website up next Friday. That's the goal. But all of the shirts will be available through there. Listening to the Silmarillion 14 times is not enough to get it all into your brain. Yeah, it's difficult. It's not an easy book to read, and that's why we take it in tiny bite-sized chunks. Alright, let's continue. It came to pass during the second age of the captivity of Melkor that the dwarves came over the blue mountains of Ered Luin into Beleriand. Themselves they named Khazad, but the Sindar called them Naugrim, the stunted people, and Gonahirim, the masters of stone. Far to the east were the most ancient dwellings of the Naugrim, but they had delved for themselves great halls and mansions after the manner of their kind in the eastern side of Ered Luin, and those cities were named in their own tongue, Gabugathal and Tumunzahar. To the north of the great height of Mount Dolmed was Gabigathul, which the elves interpreted in their tongue Belegost, that is, Mickelberg. And southward was delved Tumunzahar, by the elves named Nogrod, the Hollow-Bold. See, even I'm stumbling over the words. So Gabilgathol is the same as Belagost, which is the same as Mickelberg. Anybody taking notes? Belagost, Tumunzahar, Tumunzahar, Nogrod, and Halobold are the same. Most of the time in the book, these two places are called Belagost and Nogrod. Tolkien tends to use the Sindar words for most things. Team Dwarves all the way, Baruch Hazad. So, just a note here. Belagost and Nogrod. These are the two main dwellings of the dwarves in Ered Luin. And in fact, I will show you guys where these are really quickly. That's why we have an overhead cam. So let me switch that up. Okay, so here is our map of Valerian. And so all the way on this border here, this is Ered Luin. These are the Blue Mountains. Now, when you look at a map from Middle-earth in the Third Age, during Lord of the Rings, these mountains are at the coastline. This entire continent ends up underneath the ocean at the end of the First Age. So, with that in mind, Ered Luin is like the coast along the ocean during the Third Age. Just to give you perspective of where this is. So this is Ered Luin, and we just heard about Mount Dolmed, which is right here. Let me zoom in a little. Alright, so we have Mount Dolmed here, and we have Belagost, and Nogrod. So basically, both sides of the mountains here are two different dwarvish dwellings. And you will see the river Askar referred to several times as like a landmarker. Same with the river Gellion, which is north-south. So the river Gellion is north-south, the river Askar is east-west, generally. So these are the two places that we're talking about. Belagost and Nogrod. Got it? Everybody got it? Let's move on. At this rate, we probably won't get through 3 chapters, but, you know. We'll take it as it comes, right? Let me shift. I like to sit on my feet and they end up getting numb. Alright, so, we learned about Belagost and Nogrod. Greatest of all the mansions of the dwarves was Khazad-dûm, the Dwaradelf, Hadodrond in the Elvish tongue, that was afterwards in the days of its darkness called Moria. But it was far off in the mountains of mist beyond the wide leagues of Eriador, and to the Eldar came but as a name and a rumor from the words of the dwarves of the Blue Mountains. So again, 3 names for another dwarvish dwelling. 4 names, actually. Khazad-dûm, which is its dwarvish name. Dwaradelf, which is typically used by mortal men. Hadodrond, which is the Sindarin name. And then Moria, which it's known as later on. Also a Sindarin name, but that's after the shadow falls and the dwarves are under siege and all the bad stuff happens. When it becomes a fallen realm, it is referred to as Moria. Pardon me. Alright. From Nogrod and Belagost, the Naugrim came forth into Beleriand, and the elves were filled with amazement, for they had believed themselves to be the only living things in Middle-earth that spoke with words or wrought with hands, and that all others were but birds and beasts. But they could understand no word of the tongue of the Naugrim, which to their ears was cumbrous and unlovely, and few ever of the Eldar have achieved the mastery of it. But the dwarves were swift to learn, and indeed were more willing to learn the Elven tongue than to teach their own to those of alien race. Few of the Eldar went ever to Menogrot and Belegost, save Eol of Nan Elmoth and Maeglin, his son. But the dwarves trafficked into Valerian, and they made a great road that passed under the shoulders of Mount Dolmed and followed the course of the river Ascar, crossing the Gellion at Sarn Athrad, the Ford of Stones, where battle after befell. There was a battle there. We'll get to that later. Ever cool was the friendship between the Naugrim and the Eldar, though much profit they had of one another. But at that time, those griefs that lay between them had not yet come to pass, and King Thingol welcomed them. But the Naugrim gave their friendship more readily to the Noldor in after days than to any others of elves and men, because of their love and reverence for Aule. And the gems of the Noldor they praised above all other wealth. In the darkness of Arda, already the dwarves wrought great works, for even from the first days of their fathers they had marvelous skill with metals and with stone. But in that ancient time, iron and copper they loved to work, rather than silver and gold. Pausing a moment to give you a few notes about a couple characters that were just introduced. We heard about Eol and Maeglin from Nan Elmoth. Nan Elmoth is a little forest. I'll eventually show it on the map. But Nan Elmoth is actually, we've heard of it before. Nan Elmoth is where Thingol first met Melian, and they took hands and stared at each other for literally decades. Once the spell was broken, they then became the king and queen of the Sindar that had stayed behind looking for them. So, Eol is considered a dark elf, and this is basically, Tolkien goes into it in other books that Eol is one of the Noldor, but he had no desire to go over to the Hitherlands. He had no desire to see the trees of Valinor. He liked the dark, he liked the starlight, and he liked being left the fuck alone. So with that in mind, he is called Eol the Dark because he's one of the Noldor who actually chose to stay in Valerian the entire time. So he's very estranged from the other Noldor, but he has the same skills as the other Noldor, even having never been taught by Aule. So, he's super skilled, he's a craftsman, his son is as well. And we'll talk about Maeglin later on, he becomes very important later, but this is the first mention of both of these characters, Eol and Maeglin. And I did mention that Gellion and Ascar would both be rivers that get referenced a lot, and they totally just were. Alright. So the dwarves preferred to work with iron and copper more than silver and gold back in these days. Now Melian had much foresight, after the manner of the Maiar, and when the second age of the captivity of Melkor had passed, she counseled Thingol that the peace of Arda would not last forever. He took thought, therefore, how he should make for himself a kingly dwelling, and a place that should be strong, if evil were to awake again in Middle-earth. And he sought aid and counsel of the dwarves of Belegost. They gave it willingly, for they were unwearied in those days and eager for new works. And though the dwarves ever demanded a price for all that they did, whether with delight or with toil, at this time they held themselves paid. For Melian taught them much that they were eager to learn, and Thingol rewarded them with many fair pearls. These Círdan gave to him, for they were got in great number in the shallow waters about the Isle of Balar. But the Naugrim had not before seen their like, and they held them dear. Pardon me. So the pearls were taken from the Isle of Balar, which is right in the bay off the coast. But the dwarves had never been there, so they had never seen pearls before. That was very special to them. Alright, but the Naugrim had not before seen their like, and they held them dear. One there was as great as a dove's egg, and its sheen was as starlight on the foam of the sea. Nymphelos they named it. and the chieftain of the dwarves of Belagost prized it above a mountain of wealth. It's a big pearl. Therefore the Naugrim labored long and gladly for Thingol, and devised for him mansions after the fashion of their people. Let's try that again. Therefore the Naugrim labored long and gladly for Thingol, and devised for him mansions after the fashion of their people, delved deep in the earth. Where the Escalduin flowed, and parted Neldoreth from Region, there rose in the midst of the forest a rocky hill, and the river ran at its feet. There they made the gates of the Hall of Thingol, and they built a bridge of stone over the river, by which alone the gates could be entered. Beyond the gates, wide passages ran down the high hills and chambers far below that were hewn into living stone. So many and so great that the dwelling was named Menogrot, the Thousand Caves. It's a big, think anthill. A big network, huge network of tunnels and caves. Thus it's called Menogrot. Meneg is a counting measurement for 1,000 in the Elvish tongue, and groth is like ground or cave dwelling. But the elves also had part in that labor, and elves and dwarves together, each with their own skill, there wrought out the visions of Melian, images of the wonder and beauty of Valinor beyond the sea. The pillars of Menegroth were hewn in the likeness of the beeches of Orome, stalk, bough, and leaf, and they were lit with lanterns of gold. The nightingales sang there as in the gardens of Lorien, and there were fountains of silver, and basins of marble, and floors of many-colored stones. Carven figures of beasts and birds there ran upon the walls, or climbed up on the pillars, or peered among the branches entwined with many flowers. And as the years passed, Melian and her maidens filled the halls with woven hangings, wherein could be read the deeds of the Valar, and many things that had befallen in Arda since its beginning, and the shadows of things that were yet to be. That was the fairest dwelling of any king that has ever been east of the sea. So, just to appreciate the visual here, a fortress, basically. This is like the biggest and most beautiful dwelling in Middle-earth, ever. Ever. And it was created by dwarves and elves together, under the direction of a Maya, who is like she's like a demigod, if you want to put it in those terms. So she's a god, or goddess rather, but of lesser power. Absolutely, I agree. The description of Menogrot in the Lays of Valerian, it's beautiful. But then I'm partial to the Lays of Valerian. The Lays of Valerian is one of the books in the History of Middle-earth series. It's book 3. But it is all of the poetry. It's the epic poetry form of mostly 2 main stories. The Fall of Gondolin. Actually, never mind. Not the Fall of Gondolin. The Lay of Leithian, which is the tale of Beren and Luthien. Oh my god, I can't talk today. It's the tale of Beren and Luthien, and also Inarnin Húrin, which is the children of Húrin. Both of these were later published into their own books, but in the Lays of Leithian, or the Lays of Valerian, we see them in their poetry form, which is super cool. We'll eventually do that. After we read the Silm, I will likely read the Lays of Valerian. I might do those as ASMR streams, because they're just very enjoyable to read. They're very chill. Alright. Where were we? So this is the fairest dwelling of any king that's ever been east of the sea. That's where we left off. And when the building of Menogrot was achieved, and there was peace in the realm of Thingol and Melian, The Naugrim yet came ever and anon over the mountains and went in traffic about the lands. But they went seldom to the Falas, for they hated the sound of the sea and feared to look upon it. To Valerian there came no other rumor or tidings of the world without. But as the third age of the captivity of Melkor drew on, the dwarves became troubled, and they spoke to King Thingol, saying that the Valar had not rooted out utterly the evils of the north. And now the remnant, having long multiplied in the dark, were coming forth once more and roaming far and wide. I won't do a voice filter for this one. There are fell beasts, they said, in the land east of the mountains, and your ancient kindred that dwell there are flying from the plains to the hills. And ere long the evil creatures came even to Beleriand, over passes in the mountains, or up from the south through the dark forests. Wolves there were, or creatures that walked in wolf shapes, and other fell beings of shadow. And among them were the orcs, who afterwards wrought ruin in Beleriand. But they were yet few and wary, and did but smell out the ways of the land, awaiting the return of their lord. Whence they came, or what they were, the elves knew not then, thinking them perhaps to be Avari, who had become evil and savage in the wild, in which they guessed all too near, it is said. Quick note there. It's, shall we say, it doesn't age well, that note, that the elves in Beleriand thought that the orcs were the Avari. The Avari, to recap, are the elves that never made the journey from Cuiviénen, where the elves first awoke, all the way into Beleriand. The elves that turned aside and didn't make the journey were called the Avari, basically the unwilling. They didn't want to go, and so they didn't. And so that the elves in Beleriand thought that the orcs were the Avari, it reeks of colonialism. We left and we traveled west, and therefore we are better and brighter, and look at how great we have become, and all y'all that stayed behind and stayed true to your roots are savages. Tolkien, your colonialism is showing. This is a theme, and I will not ignore it as we read through, okay? Yeah, oops, and oop. This is one thing that Tolkien does not restrain in his writing, the sense of imperialism and colonialism. He doesn't necessarily always praise the colonialism, but it's present. It's very present. And the thought that basically the more eastern you went, the higher on the hierarchy you were. So there's very much a crossover there that I feel compelled to mention. So it does turn out that the orcs were Avari that were captured by Melkor and twisted and tortured and mutilated into what became the orcs, or goblins. So that they are Avari is misleading. Yes, they are, but they were twisted by Melkor. These weren't just the natural state of the Avari. The Avari did not just go savage. It doesn't work like that. But to the elves in Beleriand, they were like, are these our long-lost cousins? Because they're kind of creeping me out. What happened? But they just sort of assumed at the time that those were the Avari, and that all Avari had become that. It's super racist. So, naughty Tolkien. Anyway. Therefore Thingol took thought for arms, which before his people had not needed, and these at first the Naugrim smithied for him, for they were greatly skilled in such work, though none among them surpassed the craftsmen of Menogrot, of whom Telchar, the smith, was greatest in renown. Quick note, I'm not sure if that is pronounced Telchar or Telkar. It is Telchar, and I'm not sure in Dwarvish if that is a Ch or a K. Like Chazadum. I sort of schwa it and phlegm it up, but that's a personal choice, so don't take my word for that. I know Elvish, not Dwarvish. So, Telchar. He was the greatest dwarven smith. A warlike race of old were all the Naugrim, and they fought, and they would fight fiercely against whomsoever grieved them. Servants of Melkor, or Eldar, or Avari, or wild beasts, or not seldom their own kin, dwarves of other mansions and lordships. Their smithcraft indeed the Sindar soon learned of them, yet in the tempering of steel alone of all crafts the dwarves were never outmatched even by the Noldor, and in the making of mail of linked rings, which was first contrived by the smiths of Belagost, and their work had no rival. At this time, therefore, the Sindar were well armed, and they drove off all creatures of evil, and had peace again. But Thingol's armories were stored with axes, and with spears and swords, and tall helms and long coats of bright mail. For the hauberks of the dwarves were so fashioned that they rusted not, but shone ever as if they were new burnished. And that proved well for Thingol in the time that was to come. Ba-ba-ba-bum. Totally rowdy boys, absolutely. So, the dwarves were a quarrelsome folk. Let's put it that way. They would not back down from a fight. And it didn't matter who the fight was against, including their own kind. So, whereas it's a huge deal when the elves have kinslayings, like, it's not done. The elves are too civilized to kill their own kin, typically, with 3 major exceptions. One of which was at the kinslaying at Alqualonde. We mentioned that before, when they killed the Teleri to get their ships. So it's a big deal for the elves to slay their kin, not so much a big deal for the dwarves. It just happens. Moving on. Actually, let me take a quick drink. How's everyone doing? Are we doing okay so far? Everyone keeping up with me? Okay. Very good, very good. Yes. Alright. Let's continue. Now, as has been told, one Lenwë of the host of Olwë forsook the march of the Eldar at the time when the Teleri were halted by the shores of the Great River upon the borders of the westlands of Middle-earth. Little is known of the wanderings of the Nandor, whom he led away down Anduin. Some, it is said, dwelt age-long in the woods of the Vale of the Great River. Some came at last to its mouths, and there dwelt by the sea. And yet others, passing by Ered Nimrais, the White Mountains, came north again and entered the wilderness of Eriador, between Ered Luin and the far mountains of Mist. This is a lot of geographic stuff. So basically, the Nandor, the Anduin is the main river in Middle-earth during the time of the Third Age. So, in case you don't know where we're talking about, the Anduin is the river that flows out from Lothlorien, that flows down between Gondor and Mordor, and eventually goes out to the ocean, where we see the Corsair ships during Lord of the Rings. So that is the Anduin. So it kind of goes down the center of the continent once we are in Third Age Middle-earth. Most of the Nandor turned away from the journey of the various elves, the Great Journey. They turned away when they hit that river. So this is saying some of them eventually went and dwelled along the river near the south, near the north where it met the mountains. Some of them went over the mountains into Eriador, which is where we see Rivendell and Hobbiton, the entirety of the Shire. It's all in Eriador, which is just a general region. So just to give context, because this is a lot of like geographic stuff that if you don't know the maps well, it gets really confusing. All right. So some of them came into Eriador. Now these were woodland people, and had no weapons of steel, and the coming of the fell beasts of the north filled them with great fear, as the Naugrim declared to King Thingol in Menogrot. Therefore Denethor, the son of Lenwë, hearing rumor of the might of Thingol and his majesty, and of the peace of his realm, gathered such host of his scattered people as he could, and led them over the mountains into Beleriand. There they were welcomed by Thingol as kin long lost that return, and they dwelt in Osiriand, the land of 7 rivers. And really quickly, I do want to show you the map again. I want to show you this, because it'll make a lot more sense. And anyone who's still over on TikTok, please feel free to join me over on my Twitch stream, where you'll be able to see the map that I'm showing through my overhead cam. Alright. Zoom out. Yoink. Okay. So, this is Ered Luin, and so over here would be Eriador, which is where we have like the Grey Havens, the Shire, Rivendell, all of that. So some of these elves, known as the Nandor, left under Denethor, the son of King Lenwë, and came over these mountains into Osiriand. Osiriand is the land of 7 rivers, because as you can see, there are 7 rivers here. There are 6 tributaries that all join with the River Gallion, so 7 rivers total. And the elves that settle here are called the Lyquindi, or the Green Elves. So the Nandor were like over here, and some of the Nandor got together under Denethor and came over into Osiriand and became the Green Elves. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And just because I mentioned that I would point it out, here is Nan Elmoth, which is where Eol and Maeglin are from. And you can kind of see where we have Mount Dolmed, and there's this road here that the dwarves tended to use. The road sort of turns northward here. And so the dwarves tended to come like through this part of East Beleriand, and they would pass by the southern border of Nan Elmoth, which is where they would do trade and such with Eol and Maeglin. And then they would go into Doriath and help out with King Thingol and the delving of Menogrot. So again, geography, fun times. This is why you come to the stream, right? Are the Nandor Avari? The Avari are just the elves that did not make the journey at all from Cuiviénen. So they didn't journey at all. Whereas the Nandor are still considered part of the Eldar, in that they did take on the Great Journey. They just happened to pull aside before getting all the way into Beleriand, until later. This little section of the Nandor that becomes the Lyquindi, they actually do make it all the way to Beleriand, and they settle in Osiriand. So they are not Avari, they are considered Eldar, because they did take the journey, they just turned off of the journey. They got off a couple exits earlier than the rest of the Eldar. Hopefully that answers your question. A huge wall map of Tolkien's Middle-earth maps from both Beleriand and the Lord of the Rings maps conjoined would be amazing, if it exists. It does not. No official map exists. Official meaning made by Christopher Tolkien, because he made the 2 main maps that we're used to seeing. It's just a colored version that I show on the stream here. So no, there's no joint map, unfortunately, though there is a thing called the Atlas of Middle-earth. Karen Fonstad she did an entire atlas of stuff. It is not entirely accurate, take it with a grain of salt, but she actually put in the time to make as many maps as possible. She has one of Menogrot, which is, all speculation, but it's still cool to look at. So feel free to check that out if you like. The Atlas of Middle-earth. I'm sure you can get it off of Amazon. But go to a bookstore and order it if you can. Support your local bookstores instead of Jeffrey Bezos. Jeffrey Bezos. You did it! Congratulations! Completely off-topic side note. Did anybody hear that Captain Kirk is going to be on the next shuttle? The next spacecraft, the next, commercial flight into space being made by the rockets that Jeffrey Bezos owns includes Captain Kirk. Oh my gosh. Captain Kirk has a seat. And I'm like, waste of money, but I can appreciate that the actor who played Captain Kirk, his name is escaping my mind at the moment. I'll shoot myself later. The actor who played Kirk is going to be one of the first people to go on a commercial flight into space. William Shatner, thank you. I was like, it's not Leonard Nimoy, it's the other one. Just losing my track of names. Gosh, William Shatner's going to space. Like, if anyone's actually watched the old Star Trek, it did not age well. But it's very funny to me that he will actually go to space. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Can you tell that I like Star Trek? I've been watching it since I was a kid. Love it. Yeah, someone has to bang the hot space aliens. Exactly. Okay, enough of Shatner. I had to bring that up. We mentioned Jeffrey Bezos, and I had to bring that up. Okay, so the Lyquindi or the Green Elves are not Avari. They are just an off-sect of the Nandor. Yeah, basically Mags. Alright, so where were we? Okay, so the Lyquindi were then welcomed by Thingol as kin long lost that return, and they dwelt in Osiriand, the land of seven rivers. Of the long years of peace that followed after the coming of Denethor, there is little tale. In those days, it is said, Daeron the minstrel, chief lore master of the kingdom of Thingol, devised his runes, and the Naugrim that came to Thingol learned them, and were well pleased with the device, esteeming Daeron's skill higher than did the Sindar, his own people. By the Naugrim, the Kirth were taken east over the mountains and passed into the knowledge of many peoples. But they were little used by the Sindar for the keeping of records, until the days of the war. And much that was held in memory perished in the ruins of Doriath. But of bliss and glad life there is little to be said before it ends, as works fair and wonderful, while still they endure for the eyes to see, are their own record, and only when they are in peril or broken forever do they pass into song. It's a beautiful way of saying, like, yes, history is an account of battles because peaceful times are boring. They're wonderful, and they're what should be strived for, but there's little to be mentioned, except a couple acts of great renown. In this case, Daeron, who's one of my personal favorite elves. But Daeron created the runes, the actual runes that the dwarves use. They're called the Kirth. Daeron's version is called the Angerthas Daeron. Angerthas from Kerth. Angerthas. It just linnets. Sorry, getting too technical in the language there. This is what I do with Elvish all the time. But the Angerthasdairon is like the Elvish runes. The runes were then adopted by the dwarves, and each rune was given a different, sound or letter value, right? So if you look at Dwarvish versus Elvish, it's the same writing system, but they don't cross over. One cannot read Dwarvish just because they know the runes in Elvish, and vice versa. So the elves would be able to recognize that it's that written language, but they wouldn't be able to read it unless they knew Dwarvish. Hope that makes sense. But Dairon is the one who made that up, and the Sindar were like, it's okay, I guess. If we need to carve a sign, maybe. But they didn't really keep historical records at that time. It was mostly just oral tradition. Is that the Yeet Isildur shirt? No. This is my Team Linden shirt. Team Linden as in the Grey Havens. I have various realms that have team shirts on my website. So this is not Yeet Isildur, but I do own that shirt. I do have a Yeet Isildur shirt. That's how I first met Dawn. And shameless self-promotion, Dawn and I just released 2 t-shirts of our own in collaboration with each other. They are over on Dawn's website, which is dawnmarshall72merch.com. if anyone would like to check them out. It's basically in Elvish. Mommy? Sorry. And Daddy? Sorry. So if anyone like, Mommy? Sorry. Mommy? Sorry. Mommy? Sorry. Excuse me. Mommy? Sorry. That trend on TikTok we made into Elvish. I translated it into Elvish, which is Emig Gohenonin, or Atheg Gohenonin. So Mommy Sorry and Daddy Sorry are on t-shirts now, and you can find those at dawnmarshall72merch.com. Have fun. Go forth. Proceeds go to both of us, so you can support me and Dawn at the same time. and we are already discussing other collaborations, so get used to it. If he wants stuff done in Elvish, it will be either me or Jamie, Tengwar teacher, to help him out with that. But it makes me excited, so have fun with the shirts. Love you guys. Thank you for the support. Alright. So things of beauty and peace endure for the eyes to see. They are their own record, and they only pass into song once they are in peril or broken forever. In Valerian in those days, the elves walked, and the rivers flowed, and the stars shone, and the night flowers gave forth their scents. And the beauty of Melian was as the noon, and the beauty of Luthien was as the dawn of spring. In Beleriand, King Thingol, upon his throne, was as the lords of the Maiar, whose power is at rest, whose joy is as an air that they breathe in all their days, whose thought flows in a tide untroubled from the heights to the deeps. In Beleriand still at times rode Orome the Great, passing like a wind over the mountains, and the sound of his horn came down the leagues of the starlight. And the elves feared him for the splendor of his countenance and the great noise of the onrush of Nahar. But when the Valaroma echoed in the hills, they knew well that all evil things were fled far away. Reminder that Orome is one of the Valar. He is the hunter of the group of Valar. Nahar is the name of his horse. It is an onomatopoeia for neighing. Neigh! Except in Elvish. And the Valaroma is the horn. It's the big, loud horn that Orome has. And it makes a great sound, and all evil things that hear it flee. So the elves knew that whenever that sounded, that everything was okay. It's just Orome. He's kind of frightening, but he's a good guy. Moving on. But it came to pass at last that the end of bliss was at hand, and the noontide of Valinor was drawing to its twilight. For as has been told, and as is known to all, being written in lore and sung in many songs, Melkor slew the trees of Valinor with the aid of Ungoliant, and escaped, and came back to Middle-earth. Far to the north befell the strife of Morgoth and Ungoliant. But the great cry of Morgoth echoed through Valerian, and all its people shrank for fear. For though they knew not what it foreboded, they heard then the herald of death. Soon afterwards Ungoliant fled from the north and came into the realm of King Thingol, and a terror of darkness was about her. But by the power of Melian she was stayed, and entered not into Neldoreth, but abode long time under the shadow of the precipices in which Dorthonion fell southward. And they became known as Ered Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror, and none dared go hither, or pass nigh to them. Their life and light were strangled, and there all waters were poisoned. But Morgoth, as has been told before, returned to Angband and built it anew. And above its doors he reared the reeking towers of Thangorodrim, and the gates of Morgoth were but 150 leagues distant from the bridge of Menogrot, far and yet all too near. Now the orcs that multiplied in the darkness of the earth grew strong and fell, and their dark lord filled them with a lust of ruin and death, and they issued from Angband's gates under the clouds that Morgoth sent forth, and passed silently into the highlands of the north. Thence on a sudden, a great army came into Valerian and assailed King Thingol. Now in his wide realm many elves wandered free in the wild, or dwelt at peace in small kindreds far sundered. And only about Menogrot in the midst of the land, and among the Falas in the country of the mariners, were there numerous peoples. But the orcs came down upon either side of Menogrot, and from camps in the east between Kellon and Gallion, and west in the plains between Sirion and Narog. These are all river names. They plundered far and wide, and Thingol was cut off from Círdan at Eglarest. Eglarest is a coast area. It's a coast dwelling. Therefore he called upon Denethor, and the elves came in force from Region beyond Aros and from Osiriand. Region is part of Doriath. Osiriand, again, is the land of seven rivers where the Green Elves lived. So forces from both those places came, and fought the first battle in the wars of Beleriand. And the eastern host of the orcs was taken between the armies of the Eldar, north of the Andram, and midway between Aros and Gallion. And there they were utterly defeated, and those that fled north from the great slaughter were waylaid by the axes of the Naugrim that issued from Mount Dolmed. Few indeed returned to Agband. But the victory of the elves was dear bought, for those of Assyriand were light-armed, and no match for the orcs, who were shod with iron and iron-shielded, and bore great spears with broad blades. And Denethor was cut off and surrounded upon the hill of Amon-Ereb. There he fell, and all his nearest kin about him, before the host of Thingol could come to his aid. Bitterly though his fall was avenged, when Thingol came upon the rear of the orcs and slew them in the heaps, his people lamented him ever after, and took no king again. After the battle, some returned to Osiriand, and their tidings filled the remnant of their people with great fear, so that thereafter they came never forth in open war, but kept themselves by wariness and secrecy. And they were called the Lyquindi, the Green Elves, because of their raiment of the color of leaves. But many went north and entered the guarded realm of Thingol, and there merged with his people. and when Thingol came again to Menogrot, he learned that the orc host in the west was victorious, and had driven Círdan to the rim of the sea. Therefore he withdrew all his people that his summons could reach within the fastness of Neldoreth and Region, and Melian put forth her power and fenced all that dominion round with an unseen wall of shadow and bewilderment, the girdle of Melian, that none thereafter could pass against her will or the will of King Thingol, unless one should come with a power greater than that of Melian the Maya. And this inner land, which was long named Eglador, was after called Doriath, the guarded kingdom, land of the girdle. Within it there was yet a watchful peace, but without there was peril and great fear, and the servants of Morgoth roamed at will, save in the walled havens of the Falas. But new tidings were at hand, which none in Middle-earth had foreseen, neither Morgoth in his pits, nor Melian in Menogrot, for no news came out of Aman. Whether by messenger, or by spirit, or by vision and dream, after the death of the trees. In this same time, Feanor came over the sea into the white ships of the Teleri, and landed in the Firth of Drengist, and there burned the ships at Loskar. So that brings us to the end of chapter 10, and that brings the Sindar's history right up to that same point where we left off last time with the Noldor. So now we have the story of the Sindar and the story of the Noldor, and now they converge. So chapter 11 is of the sun and moon and the hiding of Valinor. And let me see, how long is this chapter? Okay, we can get through this next chapter, but we will not get to chapter 12. So just chapters 10 and 11 today. Hey, Ties the Betrayer, thank you so much for the gifted sub. Mr. Ree! Mr. Ree, welcome. Welcome to the, I don't have a fun name for my followers on Twitch. I don't have a fun name for you guys, I'm sorry. Someone pick a fan name. But welcome. Welcome to the community. And thank you so much for the gift, Tice. I appreciate that. Thank you. All the hearts. You can now use the finger heart emote. Alright, so let's do the sun and moon as well. Are there any questions before I get started on the sun and moon? Let me look back through chat. What if they were brought to Valinor? Oh, if orcs were brought to Valinor. You wonder the same about Gollum. What if he had made it to Valinor? Would he be healed back into his proto-hobbit form? That's an interesting thought. I'm not sure. All things that go to Valinor are healed and bettered, generally speaking, but we also have to think about mortals that go to Valinor don't live forever. I think the ring bearers are exceptions. They have prolonged lives, but only while they are in possession of the ring. Once they don't have the ring anymore, like we see with Bilbo, once he doesn't have the ring anymore, age catches up with him. Same thing with Frodo and likely Sam as well. Though Sam had much lower exposure to the ring, so I don't think he was nearly as corrupted and affected by it. But Gollum for sure was hardcore changed by the ring. But would that be healed if he went to Valinor? It's very possible that he might over time return to his proto-hobbit form. There would be pity for a creature like Gollum. And I think the Valar especially would understand, Gollum is the reason the ring got destroyed. Now, if the story had gone a completely different way, and Gollum had not died in that pursuit of the ring, if the ring had been destroyed but Gollum lived, if that third eagle had picked up Gollum, and he was finally free from the influence of the ring. He would have, just, going with the trend, he would have been accepted as a ring bearer over into Valinor. Now, would the elves have been thrilled to have Gollum on the boat with them? Probably not. Probably not. Would Sam have approved of Frodo and Gollum taking the ship together to Valinor? Probably not. But it's a fun thought, regardless. But I do think that Valinor would have healed him. I know, poor Gollum. I mean, he really gets the raw end of the deal in, like, every way. But let's continue with Chapter 11. Take a quick drink, and we'll get on with it. Gollum would have been psyched for lots of fresh seafood. I mean, that's true. Because Gollum was one of the river folk. He's used to freshwater fish, not saltwater fish. So that would be quite the experience for him. That makes me happy. That's a fun thought. I like that. I'll keep that. Well done. Well done, Mags. Just so sweet. Yeah, oh man. The Teleri would feed him so well. It would totally feed him well. Take Gollum deep sea fishing. He would love it. He would totally love it. Though he's used to dealing with currents, but not like ocean currents, so... And he doesn't like the touch of heathline, so I don't know how they would keep him from, straying too far from the boat. Again, fun thought, though. Fun thought. Alright, Chapter 11, of the Sun and Moon and the Hiding of Valinor. It is told that after the flight of Melkor, the Valar sat long unmoved upon their thrones in the Ring of Doom. But they were not idle, as Feanor declared in the folly of his heart. For the Valar may work many things with thought rather than with hands, and without voices, in silence they may hold counsel with one another. Thus they held vigil in the night of Valinor, and their thought passed back beyond Ea and forth to the end. Yet neither power nor wisdom assuaged their grief, and the knowing of evil in the hour of its being. And they mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Feanor. Of the works of Melkor, let me try that again. And they mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Feanor. Of the works of Melkor, one of the most evil. For Feanor was made the mightiest in all parts of body and mind, in valor, in endurance, in beauty, in understanding, in skill, in strength, and in subtlety alike, of all the children of Iluvatar, and a bright flame was in him. The works of wonder for the glory of Arda that he might otherwise have wrought, only Manwë might in some measure conceive. And it was told by the Vanyar, who held vigil with the Valar, that when the messengers declared to Manwë the answers of Feanor to his heralds, Manwë wept and bowed his head. But as that last word of Feanor, that at the least the Noldors should do deeds to live in song forever, he raised his head, as one that hears a voice far off. Pardon me, and he said,
"So shall it be. Dear bought those songs shall be accounted, and yet shall be well bought, for the price could be no other. Thus, even as ever spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been."
But Mandos said,
"And yet remain evil. To me shall Valinor come soon."
Bum. Doom. Doom, 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 doom. Doom, 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 doom. The end. I'm glad you like it, Fennel. So, Mandos, aka Namo, calling out the truth before anybody else knows it because he knows all things. Namo is one who, except for like a couple small exceptions, he knows the entirety of the timeline. He knows the fate of all things. And so there's a moment in a previous chapter where Mandos speaks up and he just says, because Feanor is fighting with Fingolfin. And Feanor says, like, watch your back or I'm gonna put my sword in it and kill you, and you'll be the first slayed amongst all the elves. And then Mandos pipes up and just says, not the first. Because at that point, no one knew that Finwë had already been killed by Melkor. So, Mandos already knew. Mandos always knows, but he rarely speaks. He's a very quiet Vala. So, when he says shit like this, and yet remain evil, to me shall Feanor come soon. He's like, don't worry, Feanor's gonna die really soon. Don't worry, y'all. This choice is gonna catch up with him super fast. So, moving on. But when at last the Valar learned that the Noldor had indeed passed out of Aman and were come back into Middle-earth, they arose and began to set forth in deeds those counsels which they had taken in thought for the redress of the evils of Melkor. Then Manwë bade Yavanna and Nienna to put forth all their powers of growth and healing, and they put forth all their powers upon the trees. But the tears of Nienna availed not to heal their mortal wounds, and for a long while Yavanna sang alone in the shadows. Yet even as hope failed and her song faltered, Telperion bore at last upon a leafless bough one great flower of silver, and Lorelin a single fruit of gold. These Yavanna took, and then the trees died, and their lifeless stems stand yet in Valinor, a memorial of vanished joy. But the flower and the fruit Yavanna gave to Aule, and Manwë hollowed them. And Aule and his people made vessels to hold them and preserve their radiance, as is said in the Silmarillion, the Song of the Sun and Moon. These vessels the Valar gave to Varda, and they might become lamps of heaven, outshining the ancient stars, being nearer to Arda, and she gave them power to traverse the lower regions of Ilmen, and set them to voyage upon appointed courses above the girdle of the earth, from the west unto the east, and to return. So just to give you a visual, originally, the sun and moon come from the final flower and fruit of Telperion and Lorelin. I'm spacing on the word I was looking for. Basically, that the final flower is from Telperion, which is the silver tree, and the final fruit is from Lorelin, the golden tree. So from those we get the sun and moon. They are given vessels, and originally Varda intended for them to go from west to east and back again. So just bouncing. Like in Pong. So basically Pong is what she intended for the sun and moon to start off with. It changes. Wait for it. Wait for it. I'm willing to wait for it. Okay. Live fast, die young. Basically, that's like the motto of Feanor. And the motto of everyone else is Feanor, no! Valinor, no! Why? How close in size are these vessels supposed to correspond to our sun and moon? They don't. I mean, given the size of the two trees, which was massive, we are probably talking about a fruit and a flower that would be like an armful. You could probably hug them. It would be a full hug. But that's how I envision them. But they weren't meant to be these great, vast celestial bodies. But this is Tolkien's creation myth. This is, his way of explaining the sun and moon. So they are definitely not the vast, large bodies of celestial rock and dust and smoldering chemicals. All right. So originally they were meant to go from west to east and then return again. These things the Valar did, recalling in their twilight the darkness of the lands of Arda, and they resolved now to illumine Middle-earth, and with light to hinder the deeds of Melkor. For they remembered the Avari that remained by the waters of their awakening, and they did not utterly forsake the Noldor in exile. And Manwë knew also that the hour of the coming of men was drawn nigh. And it is said indeed that even as the Valar made war upon Melkor for the sake of the Quendi, so now for that time they forebode for the sake... Oh my gosh, let's try that again. And it is said indeed that even as the Valar made war upon Melkor for the sake of the Quendi, so now for that time they forbore for the sake of the Hildor, the aftercomers, the other children of Ilúvatar. For so grievous had been the hurts of Middle-earth in the war upon Utumno that the Valar feared lest even worse should now befall. Whereas the Hildor should be mortal and weaker than the Quendi to withstand fear and tumult. Moreover, it was not revealed to Manwë where the beginning of men should be, north, south, or east. Therefore the Valar sent forth light, but made strong the land of their dwelling. Isil, the sheen... Pardon me. My brain short-circuited there. Isil, the sheen the Vanyar of old named the moon, flower of Telperion in Valinor, and Anar, the fire-golden fruit of Lorelin, they named the sun. So, Isil, which in Sindarin is then Ithil, the S softens to a TH. So Isil or Ithil is the name for the moon, and Anar or Anor is the name for the sun. But the Noldor named them also Ranna, the wayward, and Vasa, the heart of fire, that awakens and consumes. For the sun was set as a sign for the awakening of men, and the waning of the elves, but the moon cherishes their memory. The maiden whom the Valar chose among the Maiar to guide the vessel of the sun was named Arien, and he that steered the island of the moon was Tilion. In the days of the trees, Arien had tended the golden flowers in the gardens of Vanna, and watered them with the bright dews of Lorelin. But Tilion was a hunter of the company of Orome, and he had a silver bow. He was a lover of silver, and when he would rest, he forsook the woods of Orome, and going into Lorien, he lay in dream by the pools of Este, in Telperion's flickering beams. And he begged to be given the task of tending forever the last flower of silver. Arien the maiden was mightier than he, and she was chosen because she had not feared the heats of Lorelin, and was unhurt by them, being from the beginning a spirit of fire, whom Melkor had not deceived nor drawn to his service. Too bright were the eyes of Arien for even the Eldar to look upon. And leaving Valinor, she forsook the form and raiment which, like the Valar, she had worn there, and she was as a naked flame, terrible in the fullness of her splendor. Isil was first wrought and made ready, and first rose into the realm of the stars, and was the elder of the new lights, as was Telperion of the trees. Then for a while the world had moonlight, and many things stirred and awoke that had waited long in the sleep of Yavanna. The servants of Morgoth were filled with amazement, but the elves of the outer lands looked up in delight. And even as the moon rose above the darkness in the west, Fingolfin let blow his silver trumpets and began his march into Middle-earth, and the shadows of his host went long and black before them. So this is a fun visual that Tolkien gives. Pardon me. It's a fun visual that Tolkien gives that as the moon rose, originally from the west, the moon rose from the west. Gosh, I have the hiccups. As the moon rose from the west, it cast the shadows of the elves, the remaining elves of the Noldor, who crossed the Helcaraxe, the grinding ice. As those elves walked into Valerian, their shadows were cast before them by the first light of the moon. So the rising of the moon corresponds with the entering of the Noldor into Valerian. So that's how we count it. But the moon is also, in general, associated with the elves, whereas the sun is associated with mortal men. It baffles me to no end that Tolkien was seriously considering trashing this story. Yeah. Like, why? Why would you do that? But you see that even in The Nature of Middle-earth, the newer book that just came out. The reckoning of time that Tolkien uses throughout that book is as if this story with the sun and moon doesn't exist. That the sun and moon were always there, in some form. It's just sort of hand-waved. He doesn't actually explain it. But, yeah. There are still, like, these solar cycles of, years, right? It's called a coronar. What was it? A year ring? I think it's a light ring or a fire ring. A ring of fire is a coronar, which is the Elvish name for a solar year. So we have all these hints that, yeah, Tolkien was seriously considering cutting this entire thing. But I love it, though. It's one of my favorite backstories. And it's where my entire What Light Do You Dream Under? Otho nu Galadvan. Otho nu Galadvan is What Light Do You Dream Under? And that was my way of asking, like, where you identify in the LGBTQ spectrum. Because there are ways to answer that question that can skew masculine, skew feminine, be completely non-binary, that can skew towards polyamory or pansexuality. And you can also say that you dream like the trees, which is perfect for intersex individuals. Or that you dream under shadow, which is perfect for ace spectrum people. So there's this metaphor that I've made. If you're watching from TikTok, please look up my videos about my metaphor for LGBTQ and Elvish. But I used this story specifically as inspiration for that, because these masculine and feminine energies are assigned to the sun and moon. So enjoy that over on my TikTok. But I do need to continue, so let's keep going. Alright, so we're back to the Noldor returning to Middle-earth, and their shadows go before them because the moon rises for the first time. Tilion had traversed the heavens 7 times, and thus was in the furthest east when the vessel of Arien was made ready. Then Anar arose in glory, and the first dawn of the sun was like a great fire upon the towers of the Pelori. The clouds of Middle-earth were kindled, and there was heard the sound of many waterfalls. Then indeed Morgoth was dismayed, and he descended into the uttermost depths of Angband, and withdrew his servants, sending forth great reek and dark cloud to hide his land from the light of the day star. Now Varda proposed that the two vessels should journey in Ilmen and ever be aloft, but not together. Each should pass from Valinor to the east and return, the one issuing from the west as the other returned from the east. Thus the first of the new days were reckoned in the manner of the trees, from the mingling of the lights when Arien and Tilion passed in their courses, above the middle of the earth. But Tilion was wayward and uncertain in speed, and held not to his appointed path, and he sought to come near to Arien, being drawn by her splendor, though the flame of Anar scorched him, and the Isle of the Moon was darkened. So this is Tolkien's way of explaining the pits on the moon. That is the vessel that Tilion was in charge of getting burned because he was wayward and kept steering too close to the sun. Because he liked Arien, he was drawn like a moth to a flame, poor guy. Alright, so that's how the moon got its spots. And why the moon started varying in orbit compared to the sun. Because of the waywardness of Tilion, therefore, and yet more because the prayers of Lorien and Este, who said that sleep and rest had been banished from the earth, and the stars were hidden, Varda changed her counsel, and allowed a time wherein the world should still have shadow and half-light. Anar rested, therefore, a while in Valinor, lying upon the cool bosom of the outer sea. And evening, the time of the descent and resting of the sun, was the hour of greatest light and joy in Aman. Again, because the sun is setting in the west, therefore it's closest to Valinor, and that whole land would be very, very bright. But soon the sun was drawn down by the servants of Ulmo, and went then in haste under the earth, and so came unseen to the east, and there mounted the heaven again, lest night be overlong, and evil walk under the moon. But by Anar the waters of the outer sea were made hot, and glowed with colored fire. And Valinor had light for a while after the passing of Arien. Yet as she journeyed under the earth and drew towards the east, the glow faded, and Valinor was dim. And the Valar mourned then most for the death of Lorelin. At dawn the shadows of the mountains of defense lay heavy on the blessed realm. Varda commanded the moon to journey in like manner, and passing under earth to arise in the east, but only after the sun had descended from heaven. But Tilion went with uncertain pace, as yet he goes, and was still drawn towards Arien, as he shall ever be. Poor guy. So that often both may be seen above the earth together, or at times it will chance that he comes so nigh that his shadow cuts off her brightness, and there is a darkness amid the day, aka an eclipse, right? Therefore, by the coming and going of Anar, the Valar reckoned the days thereafter until the change of the world. For Tilion tarried seldom in Valinor, and more often would pass swiftly over the western land, over Avathar, or Ahriman, or Valinor, and plunge into the chasm beyond the outer sea, pursuing his way alone amid the grots and caverns at the roots of Arda. There he would often wander long, and late would return. I just love this characterization of the moon. It's very Shakespearean in a way. Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon who constantly, changes in her orb, right? Romeo and Juliet. Swear not by the moon. Because he is inconstant. He does his own thing. There is no consistency with the moon. So there is this characterization to explain the variance in the orbit of the moon compared to the sun. All right. Still, therefore, after the long night, the light of Valinor was greater and fairer than upon Middle-earth, for the sun rested there, and the lights of heaven drew nearer to earth in that region. But neither the sun nor the moon can recall the light that was of old, that came from the trees before they were touched by the poison of Ungoliant. That light lives now in Silmarils alone. But Morgoth hated the new lights, and was for a while confounded by this unlooked-for stroke of the Valar. Then he assailed Tilion, sending spirits of shadow against him, and there was strife in Ilmen. Ilmen is the outer casing of the sky in the world, in case that wasn't clear. Then he assailed Tilion, sending spirits of shadow against him, and there was strife in Ilmen beneath the paths of the stars. But Tilion was victorious, and Arien Morgoth feared with a great fear. But he dared not come nigh her, having indeed no longer the power, for as he grew in malice, and sent forth from himself the evil that he conceived in lies and creatures of wickedness, his might passed into them, and was dispersed, and he himself became ever more bound to the earth, unwilling to issue from his dark strongholds. With shadows he hid himself and his servants from Arien, the glance of whose eyes they could not long endure. And the lands near his dwelling were shrouded in fumes and great clouds. So this is where we explain why most orcs are photosensitive. They don't do well under normal sunlight. And this continues all the way into the Third Age until we get the Uruk-hai, that are bred with mortal men, and therefore are less prone to hating the sun. So orcs don't like the sunlight, because Melkor/Morgoth doesn't like the sunlight. So at least from Thangorodrim, which are the great mountains in Agband, at the very north of Valerian, from there, think of it like an active volcano. It's constantly spewing toxic fumes. And these clouds are meant to obscure the sun and moon to make it easier for the orcs and other evil creatures of Melkor to travel. So hopefully that explains that. What would the elves call fireflies? Ooh. I don't know. I would have to look up a couple words to see if there was something, to make that compound word out of Sindarin. I'll look that up. If I come up with something, I'll make a TikTok video about it. Alright, but seeing the assault of Tilion, the Valar were in doubt, fearing what the malice and cunning of Morgoth might yet contrive against them. Being unwilling to make war upon him in Middle-earth, they remembered nonetheless the ruin of Almaren, and they resolved that the like should not befall Valinor. Therefore, at the time they fortified their land anew, and raised up the mountain walls of the Pelori to sheer and dreadful heights, east, north, and south. Their outer sides were dark and smooth, without foothold or ledge, and they fell in great precipices with faces hard as glass, and rose up to towers with crowns of white ice. A sleepless watch was set upon them. I am struggling today. A sleepless watch was set upon them, and no pass led through them, save only at the Calakiria. But that pass the Valar did not close, because of the Eldar that were faithful. And in the city of Tirion, upon the green hill, Finarfin yet ruled the remnant of the Noldor in the deep cleft of the mountains. For all those of elven race, even the Vanyar and Ingwe their lord, must breathe at times the outer air and the wind that comes over the sea from the lands of their birth. And the Valar would not sunder the Teleri wholly from their kin. But in the Calakiria they set strong towers and many sentinels. And at this issue upon the plains of Valmar a host was encamped, so that neither bird, nor beast, nor elf, nor man, nor any creature beside that dwelt in Middle-earth could pass that leaguer. And in that time also, which songs call Nortale Valinorva, Nortale Valinorva, the hiding of Valinor, the Enchanted Isles were set, and all the seas about them were filled with shadows and bewilderment. And these isles were strung as a net in the shadowy seas from the north to the south, before Tol Eressëa, the Lonely Isle, is reached by one sailing west. Hardly might any vessel pass between them, for in the dangerous sounds the waves sighed forever upon dark rocks shrouded in mist. And in the twilight a great weariness came upon mariners and a loathing of the sea. But all that ever set foot upon the isles were there entrapped, and slept until the change of the world. Thus it was that Mandos foretold to them in Ahriman, the blessed realm was shut against the Noldor. And of the many messengers that in after days sailed into the west, none came ever to Valinor, save only one, the mightiest mariner of song. And thus ends chapter 11. Right on time, 10:30. I love that last section because we even talk about, like, there's almost this siren-like quality. Like, anyone who travels west trying to get to Valinor, they are following this urge, right? But once they hit those, once they hit those Enchanted Isles, which are like a little dotted line encasing Tol Eressëa and that dip between the mountains, which is called the Calakiria. When you get close enough to Tol Eressëa, you hit all of these tiny little islands. So these are like the encircling little islands. So they keep everything safe, but they're shrouded in mist and you can constantly hear waves crashing upon the rocks. So you know it's not safe. But there's an enchantment over the area too to make you hate being at sea. So it's like anyone who manages to stop there, if they get shipwrecked on any of these tiny islands that are in the way, if they get shipwrecked there, they go to sleep. Instant sleep. Everyone goes to sleep. It's like Sleeping Beauty. Like, done. The fairies have got you. You are asleep until the changing of the world. Which one assumes they would then collect all the people that were on these islands and, you know, push them into Valinor. But can you imagine that you travel west, right? You hit one of these islands, you're shipwrecked, and you get on the island and all you see are these bodies that look like they're dead. Hosts of shipwrecked peoples from various times in history, all just dead asleep. They haven't died, but they're asleep. I can't even imagine. That would be frightening, okay? So creepy. Exactly, like nobody talks about this. Why are we not talking about this? I need to make a TikTok video about that. About how freaking creepy it is. It's perfect for spoopy season. It's totally perfect for October. I'll try and make that video soon. 'Cause this is creepy. You're such a creep, Tolkien. Isn't he great, though? Like, I know the writing is difficult. I know that this is like history textbook difficulty here. It's not easy to read. But can we appreciate the world building? Can we appreciate the world building? It's wonderful. Yeah, hopefully it's at least a refreshing nap. One would hope. I think the Valar aren't cruel. Like, they're trying to protect themselves and protect the elves that remained behind, so they aren't going to, like, make it a nightmarish sleep. They're just trying to deter you and keep you out of Valinor. Which becomes an issue with the Númenóreans later on. We'll get there. But that is it for today. Any parting questions? I do need to run to go get my hair done, so next time you see me, I will have bright green hair. Do you get to stay in Valinor, or do you wake up and fall back down to Arda after it gets lifted out of the sea? I don't know. I think it's one of two things. If you are an elf, you get taken into Valinor, and you stay there. Once the world is changed, basically, when Numenor falls and they change from a flat Earth, because we did mention that the sun and moon go underneath the Earth through caverns, right? This is a flat Earth that Tolkien created. Eventually, it gets rounded into a sphere, and Valinor is taken out of it entirely. So that no matter how long you sail, unless you are going through the narrow path, where the globe hits that plane, you can't get to Valinor except through that path. It's special. But that's what keeps mortals from it. But during this time period, before the world is reshaped, if you were elvish and you fell upon these isles, you were probably put to sleep and then woken up and taken to Valinor once the world was changing. If you were mortal, if you happened to be a crazy good mariner and tried to sail out to Valinor, having heard rumors from the elves or what have you, you would have shipwrecked on these rocks, been put to sleep, and then at the change in the world, you were probably brought to the Halls of Mandos. So you're in Valinor, but you're not alive. You're not allowed to leave. I would think like it would be kind of like being dead. But death is not meant to be a hugely unpleasant thing. Like, the Halls of Mandos are usually depicted as being these very foreboding, dark places, but I don't think it would be like that. Much like Lorien is the land of dreams, and there's this isle that Este, has in the middle of the lake there. And that's like this island of rest and relaxation and rejuvenation. I feel that there's a similar kind of energy to the Halls of Mandos. The Halls of Mandos are where elves are supposed to confront all of the life lessons that they were supposed to learn throughout their existence in Valinor or in Middle-earth especially. So when they die, they pass into the halls. In those halls, they are given the support that they need in order to learn life lessons. And once they have done so and reconciled themselves with what happened, then they are reborn. The elves are. For mortal men, we don't know what happens to them when they die. We don't know if there's like a separate section of the Halls of Mandos where they go. It's one of those mysteries. We don't know. Mandos himself, Namo, he probably knows, but it's not shared with anybody. How often do I go live? At least once a week. At least on Saturday. For Silmarillion Saturday. I am starting to get back into streaming more frequently. I am trying to do some gaming. I do have old retro Lord of the Rings games that I've been playing for fun, and I also enjoy doing ASMR. So I get really close to my mic and we do some whispering and some singing and all sorts of good stuff. That's what my voice modifiers are for as well. No problem, fennel cakes. I love discussing this stuff, obviously. I pause a lot to give you guys more context and just geek out over everything. You like to believe that Feanor had to walk a gauntlet of people smacking him upside the head when he gets to the Halls of Mandos. If all these elves are dwelling simultaneously in the Halls of Mandos before they get reborn, guarantee you. Because we will find this out very soon. In the next few chapters, Feanor will perish. So Feanor goes to the Halls of Mandos pretty shortly after the kinslaying. So yeah, it's perfectly reasonable to have him need to confront all of the people who died because of his life choices. Now, would that go over well? Would he learn the lesson? Probably not immediately. He's too headstrong. Which is why Feanor doesn't come out of the Halls of Mandos until the end of days. Until after this entire theme of music is sung. Feanor comes out at the very, very end. He stays in the Halls of Mandos for a very long time. And to my knowledge, it's because he resists those life lessons. He is very self-righteous. So, is it reasonable to assume that, you know, he just stands there and literally the thousands of elves that lost their lives in the kinslaying just smack him and be like, asshole? Fuck you, Feanor. Probably. That's reasonable. Would their bodies age when they get shipwrecked, or would they stay the same? I think they would stay the same. You're close enough to Valinor that the power of the Valar would be there. It's the power of the Valar that puts such enchantment and, you know, the mists and all of this, you know, not wanting to be in the sea anymore. There is a lot of power put into this area, so I think that, yes, it would preserve the bodies. All right, I need to go, everybody, but thank you guys for joining me today. I'm going to quit the stream over on Twitch first. Thank you everyone for joining me. I will see you next Saturday for more Silmarillion reading. We only got through chapters 10 and 11 today, so we'll start with chapter 12 next time. I will see you guys then, and hopefully there will be another stream of just fun ASMR or gaming some other time during the week. Everyone take care, and I will see you guys later. Bye!